All right. Welcome all. We are starting a new chapter today in the path of the righteous Gentile. And in the edition that I'm using, it's page 74, chapter 6. And surely compared to the previous chapter, the next couple of chapters are going to be very short. As we mentioned before, several times, that when it comes to the 7 Noachide commandments, in a certain sense, the main one is the prohibition of idolatry in any way, shape, or form, basically, or things related to idolatry. This next one is one of the 7, and in English it's called blasphemy. And in the Hebrew, the way that it's referred to in the Talmud and in the Rambam, Maimonides, etc., is what we often do in the rabbinic language, in the rabbinic lexicon, if you will, is some things are so not good that we use a language that we say the opposite of what we mean. For instance, sometimes when the Talmud wants to speak about terrible things about the Jewish people, it calls them the enemies of the Jewish people, because we don't want to articulate such a thing about Jews. So in this case as well, we don't want to even say outright what it is, so we call it Birkas Hashem. Birkas Hashem literally means blessing of God, blessing him. What we mean is the exact opposite. But in English, you don't have that issue. Blasphemy is blasphemy. Now, we're going to learn here in this chapter certain things that originally one was to do certain things, but then came a point where we don't do that anymore. So basically, this chapter is going to be like everything else that they intend in this book, to be very practical. Okay, the focus here is on the practicality, and much of the book, as we said, are direct translations of the words of the Rambam Maimonides. So this is very practical. How does this apply nowadays to us? What's forbidden, what's not, etc. And a lot of it is a matter of habit. And people say certain things and they don't mean it literally. It's still not good. So without any further ado, let us begin inside. So again, chapter 6, page 74, blasphemy, part 1. Blasphemy is the act of cursing the Creator. It is a deed so indescribably tenuous that the Talmud, whenever referring to blasphemy, calls it by the euphemistic term, Birkas Hashem, blessing God, quote unquote, to avoid directly expressing the idea of cursing God, Father of all. So that's why it's called Birkas Hashem, blessing of Hashem. 2, blasphemy is the only means by which one transgresses the 7 universal commandments through the faculty of speech alone. Now, when studying these 7 universal Noachide commandments in depth and in detail, so there are things, for example, slander, or what's called the evil tongue, lashon hara, speaking negatively about someone else. So for a Jew, the rules and the laws are very, very clear. What is forbidden, what is permitted, what is biblically forbidden, what is rabbinically forbidden, etc., etc. Then the question becomes, do they, and to what extent, do they apply for a Noachide? But that's when you're really, really going to go into great detail. We're not doing that yet. This book doesn't go into that much detail. This book is, it's more than an overview, but it's pretty much going through the 7 Noachide commandments. And therefore, as far as the 7 are concerned, if we are going to say that something is, that lashon hara, that speaking negatively about someone else is forbidden, or that saying something hurtful to someone else is forbidden, the question becomes then, under which one of the 7 does that fall? But here, without any question, this prohibition of blasphemy, it's only about speaking. So that's very clear. So it's the only one of the 7 which begins and ends with speech. That is something which is forbidden for any human being to say. 3, blasphemy falls into the category of revenge. When someone is harmed by a person and seeks revenge, he may shout at the person or curse him. If the harm is great, the one seeking vengeance may not be satisfied by words alone, but may physically strike out at the one who harmed him. In extreme cases, the vengeful person may not be satisfied till he kills. This is between a man and his neighbor, fellow human being. Between man and God, it is somewhat different. Man cannot kill God, nor can he strike him physically. The ultimate revenge that man can take against God is to curse him. Therefore, blasphemy is seen as the expression of the desire to hurt God, even to erase his existence or murder him, so to say. Now, of course, God doesn't get hurt by anyone's curses, and it's totally meaningless. We're talking about from the perception or from the end of the sinner, of the person doing that. That's the problem. No worries about God. Can't hurt him. So that would fall into the category of revenge. Now, of course, the person might say, oh, I didn't mean that. It's just a figure of speech, or it's just the way that I react. Well, then take God's name out of the picture, as we'll soon discuss. Number 4, the prohibition against blasphemy comes to teach us not to speak evil against God, nor to detract from his extollance in any way by intentionally using words to lessen the reverence and faith that are due him. Simple. 5, as with any of the 7 universal commandments, before one can be tried in a court of law for having transgressed a commandment, there must be a witness to the deed who is willing to testify against the accused. This poses a problem, for how can the witness testify against the accused unless he repeats the blasphemous expression used, which would be a further transgression of this commandment? Now, of course, this is taken straight out of the law for Jews as well. But since blasphemy is clearly forbidden for non-Jews, same thing applies. So the question is, what's the witness supposed to say? I heard so-and-so curse, when it comes to a testimony, especially any testimony, but especially if it's going to be a capital offense, we cannot rely on hints or implications that the person is saying. You have to say outright exactly what you saw, and in this case, what you heard. So, 6, in the Jewish courts of law, the matter was handled in the following manner. This is how it would be in the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court. The witnesses, of course, you need to have at least 2 kosher witnesses for the Jew. The witnesses, during the entirety of the trial, were directed to use a euphemistic phrase for the actual blasphemous utterance that they heard, eliminating reference to God in the phrase. What they would say is, Yoisei, instead of God. They would use Yoisei, which happens to be a name, and in Hebrew letters it's spelled Yud, Vav, Samach Yud. But they would say Yoisei instead of saying what they heard. That was the code. But that's what they were saying the whole time during the whole process, during the trial and during the entire interrogation, etc. Then, at the conclusion of the proceedings, everyone understood what they meant when they said this word, Yosei, but at the end, the courtroom was cleared of all but those essential to the trial. Okay, so any, what do you call them? The bystanders, the spectators. All the spectators at this point have to step out. Okay, now it's only people that are necessary, meaning the judges, the court recorder, the parties involved, and the witnesses. And the witnesses were obligated to repeat the actual blasphemy that they heard. They had to say it outright, exactly as they heard, word for word. Upon hearing the blasphemy, the judges rent their garments as one does for the death of a parent or any other tragedy that elicits grief. So all the people that are present, when they hear what the witnesses said, because of the explicit content of what they said, everybody there has to actually rent their garment. Number 7, however, Rabbi Chia in the Talmud, one of the Talmudic sages, declared that after the destruction of the second temple, one who heard blasphemy was no longer required to rent his garments. Otherwise, all will be walking around with their garments in tatters, because unfortunately it became somewhat common. So the rules kind of changed. And therefore, people no longer are to tear their garments. See, in the past, it wasn't just you were in court listening to the witnesses. As soon as you heard such a thing, you would have to have done it, which presumably means that when the witnesses would hear the person make that blasphemous statement, they had to rent their garments. And then later on, at the end of the court proceeding, when they have to repeat what he said, then all present would do that. Number 8. The Code of Jewish Law, known as the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Law, which is the final word in determining the religious obligations of the Jew. This is much after Talmud and much after Maimonides. Code of Jewish Law was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo some 500 years ago. He is in the great city, holy city of Tzefas in Israel, the land of Israel. So that's the final ruling. So in the Code of Jewish Law, it states that a person who hears blasphemy is commanded to place the blasphemer under a ban of excommunication, regardless of whether the blasphemy was uttered against God's name or any of his divine attributes. Meaning we have a lot of words that we refer to God as HaGodol, HaGibor, the mighty, the awesome. These are descriptions. They're not one of his names. They're not allowed to be erased. But it's clearly referring to God. Whether in the Hebrew language or any other language of the world, it doesn't have to be in the holy tongue of Hebrew. Or whether the blasphemer was a Jew or a Gentile. No difference, Jew or not. If a person hears someone, so according to the Code of Jewish Law, the person is to put that person what's called legally, in the words of the Shulchan Aruch, it's called nidui, which is a ban of excommunication. This ban of excommunication means that the person has no rights as a member of the community and that all are forbidden to speak to him. Pretty serious stuff. Nine, profaning the Lord of hosts with one's lips, God forbid, is a transgression similar to, but worse than, idolatry. How's that? Whereas idolatry is the act of worshiping a creation and thereby denying the true existence of the creator, right? That's basically, in a nutshell, the problem with idolatry. Obviously, there's volumes to say about that, and it's not so simple. But if you had to sum up the crux of idolatry, that's how you would say it pretty much. That it's denying the existence of the Creator, or to some degree. Blasphemy is an acknowledgement of his existence, but a denial of his greatness or his goodness. So which is worse? Good question. It's a good philosophical question. And now we're going to explain. The blasphemer denies the truth that everything comes directly from God, solely for mankind's benefit, and as a bestowal of goodness. That's the fact. That's our belief, philosophically. Everything is from God. And God is the source of good, and God is only good. And ultimately, everything that God does is for the benefit of all. So put that together. Yes, men make choices. Yes, men are given the ability to have choice, and they are held accountable for what they do. That is an age-old philosophical question, this seemingly contradiction, but we're not going to deal with that right now. But we all understand that, let's say it wasn't with the innovation or the interference of man. It was completely what we would call natural or circumstantial. In other words, directly from God. Then who exactly are you angry with? Often the goodness is unrevealed, as with a person's pain and suffering, which of course we don't understand in most cases, and therefore we don't really appreciate it. But that has nothing to do with the truth of the fact that we believe that it is from God. At these times, one with a coarse consciousness or without a sufficient degree of faith in God can come to verbally express dissatisfaction with his lot through blasphemy, and thus transgress the law. Now, I would like to elaborate on this. However, since the chapter is so short, I think it'll be better if we try to first finish the chapter and then we can discuss it. But what we just said now, there's a lot to discuss. And presumably everybody here heard of the book of Job, Eov. Eov was a very interesting character, very righteous person. And I think it's fair to say, it's one of the most famous books in the Tanakh because of the messages and the lessons of the story for life. There's a whole discussion in the Talmud all about that. Who was Eov? When did he live? Etc. Number 10. We see the essence of this problem in the book of Job. Job, God's faithful servant, was struck by Satan with boils from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Not a very pretty scene. As he sat in agony from the affliction, his wife scolded him, saying, "Are you still holding fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But he answered her, "You speak as one who is despicable. Should we accept only the good from God and not also accept the evil?" With all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Very famous. All right, so we have a very important lesson to learn from him. You believe in God, you have faith in God, and you know that God is only good and the ultimate of good. Well, then when we get what we appreciate and what we know and what we perceive as good, we thank him. And when, God forbid, I say, one gets something which is perceived as anything but good, and it's terrible and unbearable etc., etc., etc. We don't appreciate it necessarily, but at the very least, I stress, we cannot curse God and be blasphemous. Really, we're required to do a lot more than that, be better than that. That's the very least. There is actually, at least for Jews, there's a blessing that one says when, God forbid, something terrible happens to the person. They bless God. The blessing is Dayan Ha'emes, the judge of truth. In other words, I may not understand, I may not appreciate, I may have no idea why in the world you did this. But I bless you, God, for it. Bless you. And actually, the Talmud says, this is the hard part, the Talmud says that a person is supposed to accept that with joy, just as he accepts the good. Pretty high level. 11. And I was going to mention, consistent with this, it is a Jewish tradition to bless God for the bad as well as for the good. Even when, God forbid, one hears news of a person's death, and we're talking about an immediate close relative, he responds by saying, Baruch Dayan Emet, blessed be the true judge. Blasphemy as an expression of an incomplete faith in God is epitomized by the false notion that there are two powers and two kingdoms, God's and Satan's. All such theology denies that God is the Lord and master of all. All right, we've discussed this in the previous chapter, somewhat at length. It's not Star Wars between two powers, the power of good, which is God, and the power of evil, which is the Satan. No, it's not even that God precedes everything, and God precedes time and space, and God created the Satan, and now look at this monster that he's made, and now that's also idolatrous. That's not it at all. God created Satan, but it's not a war between God and the Satan. It's a war between good and evil. It's a war between Kedusha, holiness, and Klipa, impurity, purity and impurity. But it's not out of God's control in any way, shape, or form at any point. And therefore, don't ever commit blasphemy. 13. The book of Job shows clearly that God is the ruler of Satan, as well as of everyone and everything else. For when Satan wishes to test Job, he first petitions God for permission, whereby God sets definite boundaries for Satan, commanding him not to take Job's life, saying, behold, he is in thy hand, but guard his life. Job chapter 2, verse 6. All right? So God tells him how to play the game. So he got permission. Satan got permission to go test this individual, to go torture him. But God told him, don't, you make sure that he doesn't die. 14. The teaching in Christian theology that the evil force rebelled against the Lord and set up a separate kingdom is tantamount to blasphemy, for it denigrates the Creator and denies his infinite majesty. 15. Some authorities state that false oaths or meaningless oaths whereby one invokes the name of God are forbidden under the category of blasphemy. It's not just a terrible sin by saying God's name in vain, but it's actually blasphemous, even though the person didn't curse. An example of a false oath would be for one to take an oath in God's name that a tree is a rock. That's called false. And a meaningless oath would be for one to swear in God's name that a tree is a tree. No, it's pointless. It's meaningless. There is a difference of opinion as to whether one who delays fulfilling an oath violates the law. As if a person swore that he would do something and he is delaying it. So the question is that fall into the same category as blasphemous or not? I think we're going to try to finish the chapter before we open up the floor for questions and comments. Part 2. 1. We're on page 77. The prohibition of blasphemy is transgressed even if one uses another term for God. For example, an attribute or epithet such as the merciful one, the Father, or any other descriptive term. No matter how one curses God, and no matter in what language, the one who transgresses this commandment is subject to the death penalty by a court of law when they were able to. Again, has to accept testimony of a witness, and then the court of law, whether it's the Jewish court or whether it's a self-established court of law of the Noachites, which is, of course, one of the 7 Noachite commandments. But in any case, the court of law would, in the olden days, have put a person to death for this. 2. If anyone acknowledges that an idolatry is true, even though he does not serve it, it is as if he reviles and blasphemes the mighty and exalted name of God. Whether a person is an idolater or a blasphemer, it is the same in that both deny God. In one way or another. 3, one who blasphemes and instantly retracts his words is nonetheless guilty if he blasphemed in front of witnesses. If he blasphemes in private and his words are heard by no one other than himself and his creator, let him repent and God will forgive his transgression. Now, this is actually the first part that we said over here, that if it's in front of witnesses, and even if he immediately retracts it, it doesn't help. This is an exception. In general, we say that if a person says something and he immediately, like within about 2 seconds or less, he immediately retracts, then we accept his retraction in almost all cases. This, however, is an exception. There's no retracting. And therefore, the witnesses will come to testify. And even if they'll testify that he immediately said, I would, no. There's certain things that there's no such thing as saying something and then saying, just kidding. There's no just kidding. Certain things you don't make jokes about. And certain things you can't say, I don't know what got into me. I said it, but I immediately regret it and I changed my mind. This is too serious and too grave of a subject to be able to say that. So therefore, you better be careful. If it's in private, well then, God knows that you regret it truthfully and you're repenting. So you're in luck that there was no one else there, and therefore, no one will put the person to death. And neither will the heavenly court, because the person, they know the truth, they know it's in your heart, and you truly regret it. 4, one who curses God in the name of idolatry is subject to being attacked and killed by zealots, who are in turn held harmless by the law. The one who is not a zealot, but seeks reprisal against a transgressor because of a desire for justice, must begin proceedings through the due process of law against the accused. Now, important. Instead of me saying it out, let's read the note. Next page, I was about to say this, but let's see it inside. Note, top of page 78, in the parentheses. A zealot is one who serves God with a selfless, passionate love and is jealous for God's honor. You gotta really, really be sincere. Reacting to a desecration of God's name, the zealot takes immediate action to stop the desecration. No time for proceedings and technicalities and go to court and testify. If one has to ponder the situation or ask the opinion of another wiser than he in such matters, his hesitation or intellectual inquiry takes him out of the category of a zealot, and he is forbidden to take action. Very tricky over here. So it's like very interesting law. The scriptural source for the action of a zealot is seen in the heroics of Pinchas, who stopped the plague among the children of Israel when he slew a prince of the tribe of Shimon and the Midianite woman with whom he was having forbidden sexual relations. That's in the book of Numbers, chapter 25, verse 7 and 8. Now, there's a lot to say about the zealot and about what that means. It's very, very tricky. You just need to know that you are a zealot, and it's got to be for real. And it seems like it's a very thin line. And I stress seems like. And the zealot, it's two people can be witnessing the same thing, and one has a mitzvah, one is obligated and doing a good thing if he does A, and the other person would actually be doing something wrong if he did A. It's unusual, because they're both the same, identical. It's not like, one of them is this type of a person, or is a Jew, one's a non-Jew, or one's a kohen, a priest, one is a Levite. No. Two identical people, two twin brothers, are witnessing the exact same event. One of them, the true zealot, must or should get up and take the law into his hands and kill the guy. The other fellow, if he would do the same, since he's not really a zealot, did something wrong. It's very unusual, because normally we say action is the main thing. Deed is paramount. Whatever you do, that's what counts. Your intentions are very important, but secondary. Deed is what counts. For the positive as well as for the negative. Let's say somebody saved someone's life, and the only reason they did it is because they wanted fame and publicity and to get the reward, because there was a $100,000 reward for whoever saves this person's life. And they only did it for the money and for the fame. They didn't do it for any, humanistic or any type of, doesn't matter. The person saved the person's life, that's what counts. And there's literally countless examples in the positive and in the negative. Main thing is what you do. Well, when it comes to a zealot, that's an exception. If you are a zealot, then you act like this. And you mustn't behave like a zealot if you aren't truly a zealot. So, a person who's going to actually curse God in the name of idolatry, at the very least, for his own sake, he better hope that there's no zealots around, because they don't have to take him to court, or there's always a chance that maybe we won't accept the testimony of the witnesses, or some technicality, or get a really good lawyer. But if there's a zealot around, boom, he takes action right away. Number 5, it should be the goal of every one of the children of Noah to strive to do more than the minimum that the law requires. For this is the idea of piety. And one who accepts the responsibility of fulfilling the 7 laws of Noah is called one of the pious of the nations, if you do it because God said so. If a person accepts the 7 Noahide commandments because God gave them to the world through Moses, that person is considered one of the pious of the nations. Bearing this in mind, a person is well advised to withhold speaking evil about his fellow man as well as against his creator. So I touched upon when I mentioned Lashon Hara, speaking negatively about another person. For in God's image was man created, and one who reviles his fellow insults God as well. If by words alone one destroys a favorable picture of a person in another's mind, this is considered killing him. And it matters not whether the destructive words are true or false. And we know all too well that that is human nature. It's very interesting, and one can, get really psychologically philosophical, but the bottom line is that we understand that for most people, it's natural to accept or to believe some juicy gossip, whether it's true or not. And because of that, our whole outlook and our whole opinion of that person has been changed. It's very scary because oftentimes it's completely false or it's very much exaggerated. And to think that that's it, the person is doomed because someone said that. So this idea of lashon hara, of evil speech about someone else, is kind of falling into this area of blasphemy. There's actually a story in the Talmud where, where someone said to someone else, "You are so ugly." And the response of the ugly person was, "Go to my maker." Like, what do you want from me? In other words, God created me. So you're insulting his creation. 6, striving to go beyond the letter of the law has no limit. For the commandments of God are as deep as the ocean and as wide as the sky. Since everything is in creation reflects the hand of the Creator, a truly pious person withholds himself from speaking negatively against anything, even if it's not prohibited. There's no prohibition against speaking against planets, animals, the world of vegetation, the earth. There's no prohibition against that. However, if a person is careful not to speak negatively against anything, that is going above and beyond the letter of the law. There are times, however, when it is appropriate and even mandatory to speak out against someone. For instance, when someone is engaging in wicked pursuits and it appears that others will follow his lead, then it becomes a great kindness and even an obligation to speak in condemnation of the transgressor, because we don't want people to, of course, continue to follow and sin. This person is causing others to sin. So you're actually doing a kindness by speaking out and saying this person is evil, wrong, bad, etc. But in the main, gossip, calumny, and tale-bearing, even when the statements are true, will stand in the way of the individual's spiritual and moral growth. This is all within, above and beyond the letter of the law. In other words, if you want to play it by the book and you want to say, look, whatever I have to keep, I'm going to keep because I believe and I accept, and that's it. But don't get me, I don't want to go overboard. Okay? Then we cannot say that all these things are forbidden. But if you're more of a spiritual person, or you want to feel more godly and more connected, and you want to improve and you want to grow, etc., so then it's not a good thing to get into the habit of doing these things, even when they're not forbidden. Again, unless they should be done, like in case of the gate. All right, we're going to open up to hear from anyone who has anything to add or ask, because there actually is a lot that can be said about different things that we've just gone through in this chapter. Please, anyone.
Yeah, I got a bunch of them. I've been sitting here writing. I remember I was talking about the time I thought it was Judah who had been killed by someone who's a zealot, but I now recall it was yeah. And the thing is that this guy was a convert, wasn't he?
No. You're saying Pinchas killed Zimri.
I thought you said Simeon.
Shimon was the tribe. He was the prince, the leader of that tribe. The tribe was Shimon.
Okay.
That's tribe number 2 in the order of the birth. Reuven, then Shimon. So each tribe had its leader, which was the top position. He's one of the 12 leaders of the Jewish people. And that was Zimri. And Pinchas, who's Aaron's grandson, Aaron the high priest, his grandson killed him.
Okay. I thought there was some kind of issue that the guy was a convert, and it kind of made people mad that he did it. But that may be something else I'm thinking about.
Yeah, you may be confusing with something else.
Yes.
The woman was not Jewish. She was a Midianite.
Right. All right. So the other thing is that I was curious. Now, somebody just becoming a Noahide, and say they've done some of these things where they've cursed God in the past, or they've done that. What happens for them once they figure this out? I mean, are those forgiven, or are they stuck with that?
So we spoke about teshuvah, returning, repenting. And even though in many cases we say you can't claim ignorance, can't say, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to kill. Well, I didn't know that God doesn't allow that. However, in many cases, we can say that since the person was unaware, so therefore their repentance is accepted by God, and they're not transgressors, and they're not liable for the death penalty. Remember, in sinning, in general, there are 3 categories of sinners. There's more, but in general terms. There is what's called in Hebrew mazid. That means purposely, intentional, premeditated. Then there is shoigeg, which means accidental. Then there's oines, which means totally not one's fault. I mean, what would be the correct English word for that? It's more than accidental. Or maybe that's accidental as opposed to shoigeg being inadvertent.
Could that be someone going through a severe, I mean, some people, when they go through like a loss of a loved one or something like that, which you mentioned earlier a little bit, and it's devastating to them, and they get mad at God, and they say all kinds of things at that moment.
Well, so we have another rule that what a person says at the moment of their intense grief, they're sort of not held accountable for. But having said that, to control our feelings is very difficult. So the fact that they get mad at God, even though if you really, really get down to it, that is idolatrous. However, there's no actual prohibition to that feeling. It's like saying, can't control my feeling. Like, what do I do? Once I have that feeling, now what do I consciously do? That's where I play into control. It's like there's certain things I'm not allowed to think about. But if they pop into my head, well, what am I supposed to do? Question is, now what do you do with it? Do you willingly and knowingly engage in it? Or do you try to push it out or ignore it or whatever your technique is going to be? Which, of course, that's discussed at great length in what's called Musar and Hasidus, in Jewish ethics and in Hasidism. Similarly over here, a person who is so hurt and so crushed and therefore angry, and there's no one to be angry with because, and the only one to be angry with is God. The good thing about that is that proves that they believe in God. So that's a positive thing. But now this is the part that they must control their mouth. They cannot say any blasphemous statements, no cursing. That's the hard part, but that's doable. Whatever they're feeling, whatever they're thinking, don't verbalize it, not even under your breath. Don't say it, bite your tongue. That's the important part. And I'm saying a lot of people, they just are into the habit of saying G-O-D, capital G-O-D, I guess, D-A-M-N, it, right? That's not a right thing to say. You're saying his name in vain, and it's kind of cursing. Don't say that. So therefore, what some people, somehow somebody came up with this. I mean, they say gosh, okay, because it's like, it's a sort of a childish thing to do. Like, I'm about to say his name, but I don't want to finish his name. Okay, gosh. And then others, as you know, instead of actually saying a word which is kind of improper, if you're really very careful, so they'll say darn. Okay, so instead of damn, it's darn. So they'll say gosh darn it. Okay, that's fine. Who's gosh and what's darn? But obviously the best thing is don't say anything like that. But if it's just we get so influenced by our surrounding and our environment, and when people around us, whether it's family, neighbors, friends, or business associates, or the media, or just living with people, because we're not living off in some bubble, so we hear so much, and then a person says something not even related to blasphemous. Sometimes a person will say a curse word or an inappropriate expression, and then they catch themselves and say, "That's so not nice what I just said. Why did I say that? That's not me. I don't talk like that." That's because you keep hearing it, so it slipped out. So we have to know that certain things are not allowed to even slip out, and that is anything which is blasphemous.
Okay, I got several, but I'm gonna just finish with this one and let somebody else do it.
Yeah, go ahead.
You read in part 2, chapter 1, that it is even if you, for example, if you use attributes like the epitaph, such as merciful one, the Father, or any descriptive, is this blasphemy?
Yeah, if you're talking about God.
Merciful one, you can't even say Father and things like that.
What?
I think what that's referring to is if the attributive name is used as a subject within the curse, whereas the object of the curse would actually have to be the explicit name, I think.
So using these words is not just using the words themselves.
It goes into the divine code goes into more detail as to how it actually has to be formulated. The blasphemy have to be formulated in order to be a court, something that the court would deal with. It would involve a use of a attributive name or one of the various names that are used for God. If it's one of those names that is attacking the explicit name of God.
This is the difference between a Noahide and a Jew. Maimonides says, in this case, we're much stricter with the Noahide. A Noahide that blasphemed, whether he used God's explicit name or whether he used a descriptive form in any language, is liable for the death penalty, which is not the case by a Jew. Because for a Jew to be liable to be put to death, he has to use God's explicit name. That's
as the subject or as the object of the sentence. Like if you're saying that the bird is beating up the dog.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bird is the subject that's doing the action, and the dog is the object that's having it happen. So the subject that's doing it, right? Yeah. So in the formulation of it, you're using the explicit, and you're using the attributive name,
right,
to attack the person is using the attributive name to attack the explicit name. If I remember correctly, I think that's how it's explained in the divine code. In that case, the subject, what is doing the action, can also be is looser for a Noahide. Is a wider. It can be in any language.
Yeah, you're right. Right. In other words, right, like Bob said, and again, the way that it's used in Talmudic form is Yoisei hit or attacked Yosei. And the word Yosei is instead of God's name. So for a Jew, he'd have to use God's explicit name each time. Whereas for Noachite, instead of saying the first Yosei, the attacker, the cursor, or whatever, he could use, or if he uses any of the descriptions of referring to God, that would still be a capital offense. Right. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
One other gentleman, but he's not.
Okay, no problem.
Was there anything else, Aaron?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a whole list. Good.
Yes. Now, the first one is that when you were talking about the Lashon Hara and speaking evil of someone, what if you're trying to tell someone about another person and they've asked you the truth about this person?
Okay.
But you're going to say, if you tell the truth, it sounds evil.
Okay. You are asking a very good question. What you're actually doing is you're opening up, I don't want to say a Pandora, you're opening up a whole, it's a good question. And basically, the laws of Lashon Hara, of slander and evil talk, etc., are very detailed, and every Jew surely needs to know them because we talk, and you have to know what's forbidden and what's not. And if a Noachite has the same guidelines as the Jew, then you have to know all that too, and that's a lot. So let me just try to put it, because what you're asking is really classes and classes and classes. It's a lot. I'm going to try to give generalizations as general guidelines. If it is for a purpose, a necessity, then it is permissible to say it. And in many cases, you're obligated to say it. And even then, there's details of how to say it. For example, there's many examples. For example, a person is dangerous. Person's dangerous. Okay? He's a murderer. He's a serial killer. He's got a long list of people. And then, comes knocking at your door, can I come over for supper? Or the guy's explosive. The guy murdered his 5 wives, one of them because she burnt his toast, one of them because she woke him up. I mean, so the man has serious problems. And now a nice young lady is contemplating marrying this fellow. You have an obligation to and she doesn't know about his history, about his past. No, she just knows, he was married and divorced. Say he killed his 5 wives because of such and such. You have to warn her. Okay, that's an extreme, crazy example. How about if somebody wants a job and the employer is your friend and he asks you, do you know this person? And the person is dishonest. Now, of course, people can repent and do teshuvah and become better people. Very nice. But what about for this person's business? Or let's say someone's asking you a question because they want to hire someone as a teacher for little children. And that the person was convicted of pedophilia. These are crazy, extreme cases. You have to speak up. But I'm speaking negatively about someone else. It's to protect people. So those are extreme examples. When you deal with extreme cases, it's easier to see black and white. Now, in real life situations, or I should say more common daily situations, it's not always so clear. So the subtleties. But that's basically the guidelines. Is it for a purpose? And even if it is, you have to be careful how you present it or how you say it. But again, that's just the tip of it. There's so much, and the laws
Yeah,
are
you can't
really,
embellish
really
it
good.
or kind of make it more colorful and stuff like that.
What was that?
I say you can't embellish it or make it more colorful or anything like that. It has to be straightforward what it is.
Generally, or what you can do at times is, if you don't know for a fact that so-and-so is actually truly a murderer or whatever, but there are such rumors. So again, that's a problem, because rumors may not be true, and all you're going to do is spread the rumor further. But because it's a matter of benefit for the person to know, then you can make this disclaimer and say, I don't know for a fact, or it hasn't been proven. However, there are serious allegations or rumors or what have you. But again, it does get a little bit into a gray area, because, why are you spreading it any further? So basically, the line is, if it's for a real benefit or a real purpose. If it's just for the sake of gossip, then there's it's not to be done. People like to talk, just gossip, shooting the breeze,
Okay. So I got one more. This one's kind of
Okay.
question I've had. Somebody else want to talk? Anybody else want to go first?
No, no. I'm sorry. I thought I had it muted. I was just agreeing with you because I appreciate being involved in the class. And so I'm being educated. So I was just excited to hear your next question. So forgive me, Aaron. You said I have one more question. I'm like, okay. Another chance to learn. That's all. So forgive me.
No problem. This thing with
Thank
Job,
you.
I've always wondered now, the Satan, when he was walking around and doing stuff, he wasn't thinking about Job at all. The one who brings Job to this Satan's mind is God. So he kind of initiated this, and I've always wondered about this. It was like it was kind of a bet or something. I bet you he can withstand whatever you throw at him or something like that. I've always wondered about that.
The book of Job is all about teaching us these very important lessons, because again, after all, there are countless people that went through very interesting lives, and not everything is recorded. By the way, I think it's a very interesting point. I don't know, say important, it's a very interesting point. Out of all of the prophets that we have in Tanakh, in the 24 books of Tanakh, only prophecies that are relevant for all future generations were recorded. There are many more prophets and prophecies that were not recorded. And that is because they weren't necessary for future generations. If only the people at that time needed to know about it, needed to hear about it, it wasn't written. So there were a lot more prophets than we have in Tanakh. And even the prophets that we have, whether it's Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Daniel, Hosea, all of them, it's possible that any one of them had many more prophecies, but they're not relevant for everyone to know. They're not part of the Torah. For example, the whole story of Nineveh with the book of Jonah, the whale. That is to teach us a very important lesson. And that's why it's written. So the book of Job is written in Ksuvim, in the third part of Tanakh, to teach us important lessons. And I don't know if you're aware, and I hope I'm allowed to teach this and say this to Noachites, because it's part of the oral tradition. Mm-hmm. There are a number of opinions, as I alluded to, exactly who he was, when he lived. The Talmud brings different opinions. There is an opinion that says that he never existed. The whole thing is a made-up parable. It's a story to teach us a lesson. Now, in Midrash, in the Agadic, as it's called, type of the oral tradition, well, there we know that that's what it's all about. It speaks about the prince and the princess, and once upon a time, and there was a king and a this. We know that those stories didn't literally happen. But here, what's unique about it, it's a book in the Tanakh. Everything in the Tanakh actually took place and happened. No one's going to tell you that, oh, Abraham and Sarah, well, they never really existed. It's just a story to teach us. No. The first thing is we take it in its literal, plain, simple, straightforward, what we call pshat, which means the simple meaning. Then there's lots of deeper levels. Whereas the book of Job, there is an opinion that even though it's a book in Tanakh, it's just there to teach us this lesson, this message. That may help understand this. What you're saying seems like a dare or a bet, between God and the Satan. Be that as it may.
Okay. Wow.
May I make a comment on that?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Since leaving Christianity, I found that the discussion of the book of Job with my still Christian friends has been the easiest avenue of approach to say that, since leaving Christianity,
yes,
I've had to defend myself to my still Christian friends.
Yes.
And so I found that by relaying the story of the book of Job, that I've been easiest to defend myself and also counter the idea that there are two separate worlds between God's kingdom in heaven and Satan ruling the prince of this earth. And that's how I've been able to say, hey, it's a kind of a common shared story, but they see it in a different light. And I'm able to defend that, say, hey, this is why I left Christianity. And this is why I don't believe there's a conflict between two worlds. There's one creator. And through the book of Job, by bringing that up, that's been the easiest path to having my Christian friends respect my change of opinion.
Good. Very good.
Yes, sir. And I thank you for being included in this discussion. It's a blessing to be amongst all of you.
Good. Before I forget, next week we don't have class, and the following week, with God's help, we are going to resume. And again, the next chapter that we're up to now is, again, relatively speaking, a very short chapter, and it's something which I hope most of us don't have a problem with. It's an easy one, I hope, for most, and that is the chapter 7, murder, the prohibition of killing. All right, so we're gonna stop at this point. All right, everybody be well, and we will resume B'li Neder, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, in 2 weeks.
Look forward to it.
Very good.
Thank you, Aaron, Bob.
All right,
Eli.
you guys have a good rest.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Peace.